A British officer held a letter over a flickering candle flame. He watched the parchment for the telltale browning of lemon juice or milk. The paper remained stubbornly blank. He tossed the report aside, convinced the page held only mundane prose. Across the room, a secret message written in a sophisticated chemical reagent sat in plain sight. The British had mastered the art of heat-based detection, yet they missed the invisible ink entirely. This failure allowed a covert network to operate under the very noses of the occupying army. The revolution was being saved by a hidden, silent weapon. In August 1778, George Washington took a calculated risk. He summoned Major Benjamin Talmadge to his headquarters. The previous intelligence efforts in New York City had collapsed under British counterintelligence. Washington needed a new approach, one that could survive the scrutiny of an occupying power. Talmadge received a direct mandate to establish a permanent intelligence ring. He looked toward the small, isolated communities of Long Island for his recruits. These men were not professional soldiers, but farmers and merchants with deep local roots. The network relied on the expertise of James J., a physician and brother of John J. He developed a two-part chemical compound known as the sympathetic stain. A writer applied the first chemical to the paper to write the message. The writing remained invisible to the naked eye. Only the application of the second chemical, the reveal agent, brought the letters to light. British officers tested every suspicious document with intense heat. The sympathetic stain was immune to this method. It remained concealed even under the most rigorous inspection. George Washington understood the necessity of this technology. He requested the ink from James J. in 1779. He recognized that intelligence could only be as effective as its delivery. If the courier was caught, the ink would be the only barrier against a hangman's noose. The ring began to organize its logistics in the shadows of occupied New York. Abraham Woodhull took the alias Samuel Culper Sr. in Setauket. Robert Townsend adopted the name Samuel Culper Jr. within the city itself. Their correspondence flowed through a dangerous clandestine route. The intelligence they gathered was remarkably precise. Townsend used his position as a coffeehouse owner to observe British naval movements. He listened to the casual conversations of officers confident in their control of the city. He recorded troop counts, supply levels, and planned naval sorties. These facts were then transcribed using the sympathetic stain. The documents looked like ordinary merchant ledgers or newspapers. The British occupation forces searched for spies, but they did not know where to look. The ring remained undetected throughout the height of the conflict. For over 150 years, the story of these volunteers was erased from history. Official records from the period omitted their names to ensure their safety. The government kept the existence of the ring a closely guarded secret. Their contributions remained lost in the archives until the 1930s. Morton Pennypacker finally uncovered the truth through meticulous research in the records. He identified the individuals who risked their lives in the shadows of the revolution. The ring had functioned without a single execution or imprisonment. Their silence had been their greatest shield against the British crown. The British Army held New York City behind a massive perimeter of warships and cannons. Major Benjamin Talmadge surveyed the geography of the Long Island Sound from his Connecticut post. He needed a chain of command that operated entirely outside of formal military channels. Abraham Woodhull lived in the quiet farming village of Setauket on the north shore of Long Island. He assumed the alias Samuel Culper Sr. to communicate with the Continental Army. Woodhull gathered information from neighbors and travelers who moved between the island and the city. The intelligence traveled by horseback over 55 miles of dangerous, occupied territory. Austin Rowe served as the primary courier for the network. He rode his horse at a punishing pace to bridge the distance between Setauket and Manhattan. The rhythmic sound of hooves echoed against the forest floor during his midnight rides. Robert Townsend maintained a shop and a coffeehouse in the heart of British-occupied New York. He operated under the alias Samuel Culper Jr. to mask his true identity. Townsend stood behind his counter and listened to the casual conversations of British officers. He observed the loading of supply ships and the movement of regiments along the docks. The merchant recorded these observations in his ledger alongside prices for sugar and tea. He concealed critical military data within the mundane details of his daily trade. The courier, Austin Rowe, collected these reports from Townsend's shop. He tucked the folded papers into his saddlebags and departed for the countryside. The route led him through British checkpoints where a single slip could result in a hanging. Caleb Brewster waited on the shores of the Long Island Sound. He commanded a small whaleboat that navigated the treacherous waters under the cover of darkness. Brewster rowed across the Sound to meet Talmadge's scouts on the Connecticut side. He carried the letters from Townsend and Woodhull directly into the hands of the Continental military. The network functioned as a decentralized web of civilians, rather than a formal army unit. Each member relied on the silence and cooperation of the others to survive. Townsend remained the most valuable asset because of his proximity to British command. He watched the naval fleet prepare for sorties while he served coffee to the enemy. The British officers never suspected the merchant of being a source of their own insecurity. The logistics of this operation turned the geography of the war into a weapon. Information flowed from the center of the occupation to the American command in a matter of days. The system relied on the physical movement of men across water and land. This web of farmers and merchants transformed the strategic landscape of the American Revolution. A leather-bound ledger lay open on a desk in Setauket. The pages contained lists of numbers instead of words. Major Benjamin Talmadge designed this system for the Culper ring. He created a codebook containing 763 numerical substitutions. A number replaced the name of every key person or location. The number 711 designated George Washington in their secret reports. The number 727 identified New York City within their correspondence. The number 728 represented the British Army stationed in the city. The operatives used these digits to obscure their true intentions. A captured document would appear as a list of mundane prices. British officers scanned the pages for evidence of espionage. They found only boring statistics about local trade and shipping. The ring relied on this layer of security to mask their movements. George Washington insisted on additional protection for his most sensitive data. He sent a specific request to James J. in 1779. The commander needed a fresh supply of the sympathetic stain. The physician provided the two-part chemical reagent to the network. The secret agents wrote their messages between lines of ordinary text. The ink remained invisible to the naked eye under normal light. British intelligence officers routinely heated letters to check for hidden writing. The sympathetic stain did not react to the application of heat. It remained concealed, even under the most rigorous inspection. Many other spy networks failed because they used heat-sensitive inks. The Culper ring avoided this fatal mistake through chemical innovation. Each report arrived at Washington's headquarters as a simple letter. His aides applied the reveal agent to the surface of the paper. The hidden intelligence emerged clearly against the blank background. This technology allowed the ring to operate for years without discovery. The members functioned as a decentralized web of local volunteers. They avoided the formal military channels that attracted British suspicion. Each agent kept his identity shielded behind the numerical code. The system operated with a cold, calculated efficiency. The safety of the entire network depended on this rigid silence. Their reliance on encryption turned simple paper into a strategic asset. The British military remained blind to the information flowing past them. The ring continued its work while the war raged around them. The next challenge lay in the movement of the British fleet. A quill scratched across a piece of parchment in the dim light of a New York shop. Robert Townsend recorded the movement of British supply ships along the East River. He carefully noted the departure of troop transports headed toward Long Island. These details moved through the network to Benjamin Talmadge by August 1779. The intelligence revealed the exact placement of British fortifications guarding the coast. George Washington studied these maps to assess the vulnerability of his own positions. The information arrived just in time to preempt a planned British offensive. The ring expanded its reach as the war deepened into a stalemate. A fleet of French warships prepared to cross the Atlantic in the summer of 1780. British commanders in New York City finalized a plan to intercept these vessels. They intended to launch a surprise attack near Newport, Rhode Island. Robert Townsend observed the frantic loading of British Marines onto transport vessels. He identified the specific naval units designated for the upcoming sortie. The merchant encoded these movements using the Culper codebook. He passed the report to Austin Rowe for the long ride to Setauket. The message reached Caleb Brewster on the dark shores of the Long Island Sound. A whaleboat cut through the black water under the cover of night. Caleb Brewster rowed hard to reach the Connecticut coastline before daybreak. He handed the leather pouch to Benjamin Talmadge at his military headquarters. The major applied the reveal agent to the seemingly blank pages of the letter. The invisible ink displayed the British naval plans in stark detail. George Washington received the warning at his camp within hours. The commander-in-chief immediately ordered a mobilization of the Continental forces. He shifted his regiments to threaten the British hold on New York City. The British command received word of the American troop movements near the city. They feared a direct assault on their primary garrison in Manhattan. The naval commanders hesitated as the threat to their base increased. The British fleet remained anchored in the harbor to defend the city. The planned interception of the French fleet at Newport was cancelled. The French ships arrived safely at their destination without encountering the enemy. The intervention proved the strategic value of the secret intelligence network. George Washington relied on these reports to maintain the safety of his allies. The Culper ring operated as a shadow force during these critical months. No British officer suspected the merchant in the coffeehouse of such high-level espionage. The ring maintained its silence while the British military focused on conventional threats. Each piece of intelligence arrived at headquarters through the decentralized web of volunteers. The success of the Newport operation solidified the trust between Washington and his spies. The commander understood that his best weapon was the information flow from New York. The ring continued to monitor the harbor as the summer of 1780 progressed. The next phase of the conflict would test the limits of their secrecy. A letter sat on a mahogany desk in the British headquarters. The ink revealed a high-level conspiracy against the American fortress at West Point. Robert Townsend observed the frantic activity of British officers in New York City. He noted the frequent meetings between the British spy master John Andre and an unknown contact. The merchant encoded these observations into his reports for the Culper ring. He used the numerical code to identify the growing threat to the Continental Army. The reports reached Benjamin Talmadge through the established relay of couriers. Major Talmadge studied the intelligence regarding the betrayal. He recognized the signature of a high-ranking American officer in the correspondence. The data pointed directly to the treasonous actions of General Benedict Arnold. George Washington received the alarming updates at his headquarters in late September 1780. He learned that a senior commander intended to surrender the garrison at West Point. The intelligence confirmed the scope of British penetration into the American command structure. General Benedict Arnold prepared to hand the strategic site to the British Crown. Major John Andre acted as the primary liaison for the treasonous plot. He traveled toward the American lines to finalize the surrender terms. The British major carried secret documents concealed within his boots. He navigated the neutral ground near Tarrytown on the 23rd of September, 1780. 3 American militiamen stopped the traveler on the road. They searched the British officer and discovered the hidden maps of West Point. The soldiers identified the documents as proof of a massive security breach. They immediately transported the prisoner to the nearest Continental outpost. The military authorities alerted George Washington to the capture of the British spy. The commander-in-chief reviewed the intercepted correspondence from John Andre. He verified the details against the earlier reports provided by the Culper ring. The intelligence from the New York merchant matched the evidence found on the prisoner. The Culper ring successfully unmasked the depth of the betrayal before the surrender occurred. Benedict Arnold fled toward the safety of the British lines upon hearing of the arrest. He escaped capture and joined the British forces in New York City. John Andre remained in American custody as a prisoner of war. The military tribunal sentenced the British major to death for espionage. The execution of John Andre took place in early October 1780. The Culper ring continued its surveillance of the harbor following the scandal. The ring provided the critical warning that allowed Washington to secure West Point. The betrayal of Benedict Arnold tested the limits of the secret network. The volunteers maintained their silence despite the high-profile nature of the treason. The ring functioned as a vital shield for the Continental Army during the crisis. The success of the operation validated the intelligence gathering of the Culper ring. The British Army marched toward the harbor in November 1783. Red-coated soldiers filed onto transport ships moored at the New York City docks. The long occupation of the city finally reached its end. Abraham Woodhull returned to his quiet farm in Setauket. Robert Townsend closed his coffee house and retreated into a private life. Austin Rowe hung up his saddle after years of dangerous rides. Caleb Brewster steered his whaleboat away from the patrols of the Long Island Sound. The Culper ring ceased its operations as the war concluded. The volunteers burned their codebooks and destroyed their remaining correspondence. George Washington maintained a strict silence regarding the identities of his secret agents. The names of the spies remained absent from official military records for decades. Biographers and historians wrote the story of the revolution without mentioning the network. The contributions of the merchant and the farmer stayed buried in the shadows of history. Generations passed while the public celebrated only the conventional heroes of the conflict. The secret of the sympathetic stain vanished into the dust of old archives. Morton Pennypacker visited the archives in the early 1930s. He discovered thousands of letters hidden in the private papers of George Washington. The researcher meticulously cross-referenced the numbers and names found in the documents. He finally identified the individuals behind the aliases of Samuel Culper Sr. and Jr. The truth emerged after 150 years of total historical obscurity. The volunteers had successfully protected their identities until the very end of their lives. You walk through the modern streets of New York, never noticing the silent history beneath the pavement. The merchant's coffee house is gone, but the mechanisms of surveillance remain. You are part of an era where information is the final currency, and like those volunteers, you are always being watched by eyes you cannot see.